Now let's take a look at calling web services. To call an XML web service, we're going to use the HTTP protocol. And then we're going to show you an example of doing it that way. And then I'm going to use proxies. And I want to explain proxies. Now, when we use HTTP, I sit here at a browser. I type in the URL, the address to the web server, and then I can pass parameters into it. And I can execute this call out to a web server somewhere. It runs the web service and passes the information back, but it comes back in XML format. Now, what can happen with Visual Studio is on the server, Microsoft.NET or the .NET framework, ASP.NET, has a proxy in here. And so what happens is I can build it into my application that when I request a web service, that more or less, and for lack of a better way, I'm just going to draw it this way. The user requests a web service. .NET grabs it and says, hey, hand this down to the proxy. Let them format it and let them send it out, okay, to the web service. This proxy object sends it out. When the result comes back, the proxy object grabs it, strips the HTML out, parses it, and it exposes it to us as an object-oriented construct like we're used to seeing in Visual Basic. Now, I hope that makes sense, and that's an overly simplified way of saying that. Let me just show you an example. Again, we're going to go out to Visual Studio. I'm going to create a new project. We'll do an ASP.NET application, a web application. And I want to call this web application, we'll call it Web SVC Example. Okay. Now, what we're going to do here is I'm going to, on this web form, let's view the toolbox. Now what I want to do is use this web service that I've got out there, add this web service that I had just a minute ago. Now keep in mind, I can still get to this add this web service by going to HTTP, localhost, web service ASMX, and bring this up. Okay, and I can click add this and put 3 plus 4 and invoke it, and it returns 7. Now notice what's happened up here in my URL. A equals 3 and B equals 4. And notice I put add this, a question mark, A equals B, ampersand, B equals 4. I could have executed it just that way. Now I'm going to change A to 87 here and B to 345. And re-execute this, and notice it just bounces back 432. Does that make sense? And so I'm going to change this one more time to 827 and change this to 355. And now when I click go here, it just simply makes the call out, gets the number, and brings it back to me. This is the way you really want to use web services. And that is to pass the parameters on the end of it, and it just bounces the information back to you. That's cool. But notice we get it in this form, this XML data. You don't want to show your users this. All we want our users to see is the result, right? Let's look at how we can programmatically do that. What we're going to do in our web form here is I'm going to drop 2 text boxes on. Here's text box 1, and here's text box 2. And I'm going to make these a little smaller so they make sense. Then I'm going to put a button on here. Then I'm going to put a label. Now, this is text box 1, text box 2, button 1, and label 1. Now, on my button, on the click event, I want you to notice what I'm going to do. Actually, before I go to the click event, I need to set a reference to that web service. So I'm going to go to Project, and notice Add Web Reference. So I'm going to choose to add a web reference. This is just like adding a reference to a DLL in the old Visual Basic world. And on the address here, I'm going to type HTTP, localhost, and then my web service, oh, and I can't remember what it was. So what I'm going to do is, normally I should have paid attention to this. Notice it's Web SVCEX Service 1. So let me switch back now. It was Web SVCX, Web SVCX Service 1 ASMX. Okay, and then I'm going to click Go here. And notice it found it. It's telling me it's here, and so I'm going to click Add Reference now. Now I've just added a reference to this particular web service. And so now what I can do is use this programmatically. So in the button click, whenever somebody clicks my button here, what I want to do is I'm going to dim get data, this is a variable, as a new instance of, and it's on the web service example. So I'm going to choose web service example, period, localhost, period, service 1. Okay, now that has created that. Now notice something. When I type get data and hit period, it is going to expose to me those web services. And if you'll notice, there's add this. Okay, and so with add this, I can then tell it that I want to pass text box 1's text field and text box 2's text field. And then I'm going to call get data.